resilient against mental disorder. As a pastor, how do you answer people who ask you if they can seek help for their mental, physical, or emotional health from medical practitioners? Because for me, I think that's an interesting thing that comes up in the Christian faith a lot. Can you help us with that interesting question?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. Like I said earlier, thanks for having me on the show. Yeah, indeed, it's a very interesting question, and it's a question that keeps coming up over and over again. It's a question I find myself needing to answer very frequently. And people ask me, should people seek help from mental professionals regarding their mental problems and emotional problems? And my answer is always yes, for a number of reasons. In the first instance, I do think that there are certain mental problems should be approached in more than one way. The fact that you approach your GP and speak to them for help does not mean that you are less able in faith, and it doesn't mean that you are weak in faith, and it's not a sign of weakness by any means. The other thing is that we do know that mental illness, even in the way we treat mental illness professionally and mental disorders, we approach using what we call a biopsychosocial model. Mainly, it means that we use medication, we use talking therapies, we use social methods, helping people with their work, with their employment, with structuring their day. We also, sometimes as well, we also deliver a service that understands that people have a spiritual part of their lives. And what we do know from research is that faith is good for mental health.
Thank you so much. And I believe that that could be the genesis of 3 interesting articles that you've written recently. I read about Kingdom Nuggets for dealing with depression in December, and I'm aware that also Churchman's Guide to Maintaining Optimal Mental Health was out in January. And lastly, for some of us who are privileged, I know you've written the second part of that, which is Mind Your Mind. Can you tell us a bit how this has come up? Just because I know you're a writer, and I know you've written a book and you do a lot of writing, but in terms of your move as a psychiatrist to writing about mental health, what's led to that?
Yes, thank you for that question as well. Yes, indeed, I think about the past year or so, I've been more concerned about putting out mental health information, mental health education, and targeting a particular group of people, targeting church people, and also people from Black ethnic minority backgrounds. Yeah. And that's a very intentional thing. The reason for that is my experience as a psychiatrist in the professional place, my experience as also somebody who is a member of those two communities has shown me that indeed that's an area of need, that there's a lot of ignorance about mental problems, there's a lot of ignorance about mental treatment, and there's a lot of ignorance about, particularly in the Black ethnic minority community as well as also among church people. And sometimes as well we live in denial. It doesn't happen here, when in actual sense it does happen. And from where I sit, I feel highly privileged that I'm a psychiatrist as well as a Christian, and that I have a pastoral role. In fact, usually I say that I feel privileged that I'm a Christian who has the privilege of serving as a psychiatrist. And that means that really there is a responsibility on my part, I think, to share that information, to help to bring information to my community, to let people know that, to let people know about mental illness, how to recognize it, and what to do about it. Because the reality is that we do know that when mental health problems are tackled very earlier on, that the outcomes are usually better. So stigma is not a very good thing. And so that's what's informed all these articles. Really, it's about putting information out there to let people understand where to get help, when to get help, where to get help, and how to get help. and what to do about the symptoms that they're having.
Thank you so much. And I would recommend that our viewers, you can have access to those articles on Testify newspaper, and I believe that is online for people to access. The interesting thing about this topic is that we know that mental health awareness is a big thing now outside the church environment.
Yes.
Why is it that even though it's because I have a personal experience in the last 1 year, I've probably dealt with about 6 or 7 cases of young people actually, because I know you manage the youth church. How prevalent is mental health disorder now in our young population, and how do we tackle that or educate parents on how best to manage these young ones? Because like you said, the earlier the better. The outcome is better if we treat this early. So what would you say is the best way for the church to actually tackle this? Because I think the young minds are being seriously attacked at the moment, and it's something that we need to kind of throw out there. Yeah.
So so you've asked a number of questions. I think the first one is about how common or how prevalent mental disorders are among young people.
Yeah.
I think there is a growing global public health concern in that regard.
Absolutely.
We do know that 1 out of 10 school children have a mental disorder of some sort, or have so that's 1 out of 10.
Yeah.
And personally, my experience is that in the last 20 years of practice as a psychiatrist, I think I've felt the effect of that when in my consultations, that indeed, even though I don't see children, sometimes I'm on call, and I can see that the ages at which children are presenting with mental disorders, acute mental disorders, in my view, appears to be falling. So younger people are presenting with acute mental disorders.
Yeah.
In terms of now, when we then go to our community, looking at people of black ethnic minority,
Yes.
what we do know is that second generation black ethnic minority children, second generation, who live in the United Kingdom, are at higher risk of mental disorders, particularly psychotic illness, than their peers. In fact, the figures show that when you look at the odds ratio, when you look at comparing them with their peers who are not from that same background, that sometimes children of black ethnic minority are 18 to 24 times more likely to be admitted into a psychiatric hospital with a psychotic illness.
Wow. That's a large.
It is quite significant. And so what are the reasons for that? A number of people have looked at what could be the reason for this. One of them is that people think that immigration itself is stressful.
Yeah.
And let's remember that these are second-generation immigrants. So they've not chosen to come to live in UK. Their parents chose to come to live in the UK. And they have to deal with the aftermath of that.
Yeah.
So that's quite interesting. Stigma at times. Also the fact that sometimes some of these children are growing up in the places where they feel different and they are told that they are different. So these are issues that parents need to know how to manage to help their children to feel robust in themselves. Every child is a unique being of God.
Yeah.
Every child, God chose every child in a very unique way, including their races, where they were born, how they were born. All of those things are unique.
Yeah.
And we need to have these frank conversations with our children from very earlier on to let them understand that they are just who they are. They are unique creatures. And there's something special that they are bringing into their world that no one else can bring except themselves. And they need to be comfortable in their skin.
So the issue of identity is what I probably raised. And for me, I think growing and coming from an African culture, usually parents don't carry you along with decisions. You just follow the decision.
Just go with it.
And I think probably that could be part of the issues that you are highlighting there, that do these children actually feel part of this decision making, and do they feel carried along? Do they feel they have or know the expectation when they get to where they're going. And they're living a group of friendship, friend network and all that, which you mentioned in your last article as being extremely important, relationships. So that could be some things that, from what you were saying, could be contributory. And it's interesting that the ages and the percentage of those young people that could suffer from a mental disorder is quite high. And that is probably one of the reasons why it's important that this information are put out there and there are resources out there for them to tap into. I'm sure there's a lot of places where help can be sought. Thank you for that. Resilience is a relative term.
It is.
And it could also be subjective. That is, the things that will break me down or burn me out or stress me out will be different from what will stress somebody else out. So when we're talking about resilience, is it spiritual resilience that comes first? Or is it physical resilience? Or is it both at the same time? How do we manage this?
Yeah, very interesting, actually. Because, like you said, resilience is a relative term. And I think it's one of those words that gets bounced around a lot. And sometimes everyone has their own private or personal meaning to it.
Yeah.
So I think in order to really talk about resilience, it's very important to start with the definition. What exactly is this?
Yes.
I'm going to give the commonly referred one, and then I will then break it down to lay language.
All right.
So according to the American Psychiatric Association, they say that resilience is a process of being able to adapt to difficult circumstances. So it's being able to, it's your process of being able to adapt to difficult circumstances, and that could be threat, it could be trauma, it could be even a loss or bereavement. And not only so, it could also be stressful situations in terms of family life, in terms of work, in terms of financial difficulties. And it's one's ability to be able to adapt well to those difficult circumstances.
Yes.
Putting it in very lay language is the ability to be able to bounce back in difficult circumstances after a difficult experience. So it's very important to really, and that's what resilience is in the basic term. Now, the question is, which one comes first? We do know, interestingly, that one of the recurring themes about resilience and the ability to be resilient is that you have a support network around you. Out of all the literature I've read about the theme, the first thing that is top on the list is usually your support network. And I think for people who might be listening today, for members of maybe for the Christian community, for even people who belong to any community at all, I think that's good news. Because what it says is that one of the most prominent factors is having a trusting, loving relationship or network of people around you. And that could include parents, it could include it could include friends, it could include even spiritual support from ministers of the gospel. So I think that's good. So I think we are starting young people who belong to the Christian faith, who have supported parents, are starting in a very good place. So I think that's important. Of course, part of the other things, part of the other features that have been identified about becoming resilient, because it's very important to note that resilience is not something we are born with. So it's not like, oh, it's hereditary, that you've got it in your genes not to be resilient, or you've got it in your genes to be resilient. It's something that we can develop. It's something that we can actually build upon. And one of the other things that have been identified is also a positive self-image, which you talked about, self-identity. So being able to see that you are unique in yourself, you've got something to contribute to community, and that your difference is not necessarily a weakness. I think that's really important. And as parents, it's our responsibility, not just as parents, it's also as teachers, as mentors, as coaches, to help young people to recognize that. And sometimes it's, for me, sometimes with the young people that I work with, not only in church but outside of church, sometimes I actually sit them down, put pen to paper to help them to recognize the things that are going well in their lives.
Yeah.
Sometimes there are certain things that we take for granted.
You're right. Yes. Yes.
So I'll just, I've been talking for a while, I'll just let you move.
No, I didn't want to interrupt you because my next question was going to be, because when I read your article, you did emphasize also on how people develop their identity based on what the society has made them to believe about themselves. And if somebody grows up with a negative belief about themselves, how do we break that down? Because the reason why I'm focusing on the youths, I had a recent news of in one of the European countries where a child failed an exam and jumped off the 8th floor. For me, that is a big concern. How was that missed? What is the support for them in school? What is everybody around them doing? How did somebody now recognize that it was fully inside? So when people grow up in a certain culture or they grow up in a certain environment, and they have this, the teachers have negatively put them down, parents, neighbors, and things like that. How do you start breaking those things down for them to begin to form positive self-image of themselves?
Right. That's very important actually. Like you said, I think the first thing is recognizing that there is a negative pattern here.
Yeah.
So I think recognition is the first thing. Helping recognizing negative thought patterns in young people.
Yeah.
Particularly if there's what is called the negative automatic thoughts.
Yeah.
And sometimes negative automatic thoughts is really the lenses through which we see ourselves, others, and the world.
Yeah.
So we see the way we see ourselves, the way we see others, and the way we see our world. If there is a negative undertone to that, and it's something that is recurring, then it's something that needs to be dealt with. I mean, sometimes some children believe that they personalize a failed experience. So they think they're failures because they failed an exam. Yeah. Or because they've not. Sometimes it's also because parents set very high standards. It's not a bad thing. I think it's very good to set very high standards for children. But I think one has to be careful as well, not be overcritical, and not to, in the process of helping them to actually run them down. Yeah. So, it's the first point is to recognize those patterns, that there is a negative pattern here and it's recurring, and it's something that needs to be dealt with. And the next thing is then to actually pinpoint those thoughts. So, if it's a child who feels that they are no good or they are not achievers, we can then sit them down and help them to rationalize those thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. And from what you're saying, it seems to me that actually parents knowing their children is important.
It is very important.
Because if you don't know them, when things begin to change, you cannot identify those changes. Because sometimes it's not only about what they say, it's about behavior, conduct, attitudes, and all sort of other things that makes that child. And unless one have a relationship with the child, it's sometimes difficult to identify that. Thank you so much. So, when I was looking at some of those interesting articles that were quite informative, I know you mentioned that mental health can be on the spectrum.
Yeah, that's correct.
And for me, that is quite interesting because every one of us are at a part of that spectrum every day of our lives, or sometimes in our life. And we cross over to the other side. And it might not just be one major thing, it could be accumulation of small stresses.
Absolutely.
How do people try and manage that? Because I think for me, I was thinking that maybe one can look at spiritual resilience, physical resilience, and emotional resilience, or a combination. Can you shed some light on that? I know it's a lot of questions built into one.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think to start with, we need to know what mental health is.
Yeah.
Because if we don't know what mental health is, it's difficult to then know when there's a deviation from that.
Yeah.
So mental health is a state of well-being. And according to the WHO, they said a while back, in the last century, they said there's no health without mental health. So really, so you can't say somebody's healthy except they also have a healthy mental health. And mental health in itself is a state of well-being in which an individual is able to fulfill their full potential. They're able to deal with the normal stressors of life, like we talked about trauma, we talked about bereavement, we talked about threats. They're able to deal with those normal stressors of life. They're also able to work in a productive way and in a fruitful way. And lastly, they're able to they're able to contribute in a significant way to their community. When all of that is achieved, then we can say that somebody has a healthy mental health. However, you then talked about the spectrum of mental health.
Yes.
So the spectrum of mental health is such that on one side of the spectrum, on the extreme side of the spectrum, we've got somebody's robust in their mental health.
Yeah.
On the other side of the spectrum, we've got mental disorders. But sometimes what we have is that a lot of people are somewhere in the middle, oscillating between those two extremes.
Yes.
And the type of experiences you have is that people in the middle are either surviving, coping. Sometimes people oscillate between surviving and coping. And those are that's really the bit that we want to address today about.
Yes.
About really how do you deal with the stressors that might actually precipitate those things.
Yeah.
Because one of the things we said about mental health is that it's actually one of the components of mental health is the ability to deal with the stressors, the normal stressors of life. So, number one, it's important to recognize the stressor. Because the reality is that in the 21st century, healthy mental health is no longer a given. It's no longer something that you can take for granted. You've got to be intentional about maintaining optimal mental health. And a lot of people are living under chronic stress because of overcommitment in several ways. And it's almost become the norm. So it's like somebody is almost always on a treadmill. Somebody is almost always on overdrive. And it's becoming norm for them. But so they are just basically barely coping, struggling, or surviving.
Yes.
And the reality is that can only go on for so long before something gives.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that explanation, because I think for our viewers who are listening to us tonight, I have with me Dr. 𝐇𝐄𝐀𝐋𝐓𝐇, a consultant psychiatrist, and has been trying to break down the topic of tonight, which is building up resilience against mental health disorder through spiritual growth, stress management, and building of family ties. We believe that the church is deficient of this awareness at the moment, and it's important for us to begin to send that message out for us to understand that there is no help with our mental health. Our spiritual health is quite important, and I'm sure Dr. Ayodele will still help us break some of these things down. And like I mentioned earlier on in the program, there are 3 articles that he has written regarding mental health. The first one was in December about the kingdom nuggets for dealing with depression. I hope during our interaction in the next half, maybe he can touch on a few of these things for us. But I will advise that we go on Testify newspaper. It's online, and you can have access to this. So you are live on 𝐿𝐼𝐭𝐡 television, and if you're listening to us from any of the social media platforms, I have tonight with me Dr. 𝐇𝐄𝐀𝐋𝐓𝐇, Executive Lead and Founder of Mentor into Medicine Consultant Psychiatry in General Adult. And is also a writer, and also has his hand in a lot of things, because I know him personally. And so we're privileged to have him with us tonight. And my next question, Dr. Ajayi, is this: balancing our spiritual commitment and our other commitment sometimes is a cause of serious stressor. And we that are Christians believe that we just have to be there for everybody.
All things to all men.
All things to all men. And that sometimes doesn't work like that. What would be your advice to our listeners and our viewers tonight about this issue?
I think it's very important to start by recognizing that every one of us has got 24 hours in a day. And overcommitment is always a reason. It always eventually leads to stress. Yeah. And when we are stressed, we can't give our best. So one of the things that I usually say is that we need to be conscious about what are the things that we are committing ourselves to. Yeah. Sometimes Christians or people from black ethnic minority find it difficult to say no.
Yes, you're right.
And no should be part of the menu of options to some of the things that is demanded of us.
Yes.
And the way to sometimes decide whether to say yes to it or a no is, obviously I know I do know that I'm talking to a lot of people who are very spiritually perceptive. Yeah. Yes, so it's good to be led by the Spirit of God. It's good to be sensitive to God's Spirit. But it's also important to also know that sometimes God has actually given us wisdom in order to know when to say yes or when to say no. Yeah. One of the things that I ask myself when I'm asked to carry out a task or to commit to something is this something that I'm gifted for? Let's go back to the Bible for 1 minute.
Yes, please.
Because like I said, I'm a Christian who has the privilege of being a psychiatrist.
Yes.
Now, when God was speaking to Jeremiah in Jeremiah 1, he said, before I formed thee, I knew you in your mother's womb.
Yes.
So every one of us has something that God has committed into our hands that he wants us to do here. Yes. But it's also put those skills, those talents, and those things that we need to perform those tasks in our lives.
Yes.
So if we find ourselves in situations in which we don't feel gifted or enabled, or it's not a natural thing for us for the task that we are being asked to do. I think it's something we need to question. I think it's something that we need to be careful about taking on. Because the reality is that there are people in the body of Christ, there are people in the community who are naturally gifted to take on those responsibilities, who are naturally gifted to take on those tasks. And when we take them on, we will be struggling, and we'll be also denying those people the opportunity to take them on.
Yes.
So it's always very important, and these are causes of stress. I think these are things that will usually cause stress.
You're absolutely right. So if one does not have the ability or the expertise or capabilities to do something, whether it's, I think for us who have a spiritual background, we feel that if we don't, then we're not spiritual enough. But we don't kind of look at it that it is not by how much we run around the church that determines how faithful we are to our belief. And I know that belief itself gives us a mindset of how we develop habits and our identity. True. And so sometimes I think the church needs to listen to things like this, and people who have expertise in mental health to try and enlighten the church more to how we balance these things, because you find people overstretching themselves beyond their ability. For example, if you have a footballer, we can ask a footballer to do something to become a cook. So, but if it's within the church, they want to do it, whether they have the skills to do it or not. Okay, thank you so much for that. And when I was looking at some issues that I had personal experience for in the church, and I'm really pleased to have you here because you're also on the pastoral team, is that a lot of Christians believe that if they don't have faith for their healing, then that means that they are not spiritual enough. And sometimes this misconception has led to premature death. I can count on my fingers people that I know that have died unnecessarily or prematurely because of this misconception. should we be talking more about health in church? Because it's all we talk about is belief, prosperity, and things like that. But our body is the temple of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
If we don't take care of it, what happens? Please, let me throw that to you, Dr. Ajayi.
I think that's a very interesting question because and it's something I'm very passionate about. Because usually I say that we all have assignments here. There's a task that before we were born, God knew us and He has an assignment for us. But the only legal right that we have to carry out that assignment on earth is our bodies.
Yeah.
So basically our bodies is the vehicle which we've been given to carry out those assignments. And if that body is not maintained well and we misuse it and allow it to expire before its time, then that means that that assignment also expires. Not because if you don't have a body, because we are not angels. Angels can come here and come and carry out an assignment and go back. But for us to be here, we need to have a physical body. We need to, and sometimes, like you say, out of foolishness, people have run down their bodies, or out of the fact that people have beliefs that are not really based on scriptures, thinking that if they seek medical help of any sort, it means that they are lacking in faith. One of the messages I thought that I'm going to really put out there today is that mental illness or mental disorders are not a sign of spiritual weakness. I don't think that they are self-seeking behavior, and I don't think that they are self-inflicted. We shouldn't see it as self-inflicted conditions. We do know that sometimes, obviously, as a result of certain habits, maybe as a result of drug use.
We can't snap out of it like that.
Yeah. Sometimes when people say, just get over it, brother, or it's well. Sometimes we say it's well. Yes, it's
when
well.
It's not well.
When it's not well, and everybody knows that it's not well, we still say it's well, and we expect people to carry on and pretend and put on a smile and put on and keep trudging on when in actual sense they are dying inside. So I think in some regard, I do feel privileged, from the spiritual background that we come from. I think, for instance, that's something that I'm very happy about, that in New Covenant Church is something that we talk about. Sometimes people are allowed, professionals are allowed to come on the pulpit and talk about it. I do know, for instance, that in the branch I attended in Bermondsey, there's quite a lot of things in place to really support young people. We have a mentoring scheme, for instance, in which young people are matched to young adults, or even young adults are matched to adults, to ensure that somebody who has an oversight over you in some way, who is holding your hand through the journeys of life and the ups and downs of life. And also being sensitive to how much people can carry in terms of responsibility. And not, I think the other message that out there ministers of the gospel need to receive at large is that also being sensitive to the capability of people who are volunteers in church, and that's something that I'm also very grateful to God about, that in the place where I worship, that's something that people are sensitive to, not just to load not to load the individual with unnecessary responsibility, which makes them to struggle.
Thank you. That is actually important, I think, and I think we that either are in leadership or the pastoral team of the church need to also help our children grow, because they look at us.
Absolutely.
And they see how we manage things, and they want to develop habits. So it's not only being discipled spiritually, but also being mentored into the things of life. I believe that's what you're trying to say to us. Just for our viewers, you can call in live, and the number to call is 44147-424-7739. If you have a question for Dr. Ajayi, please call in. We'll be happy to take your questions. In one of the interesting articles that you wrote in the newspaper that I mentioned earlier on, you talk about confiding in somebody about depression. And in my experience, being a Christian and working in the church, I know I always speak about this to my wife, and I'm saying, if there's a big church and you have a gift, you should not be broke. Because if everybody is bringing their business to you, it should be sufficient. Yeah. And that's what happened in the Acts of the Apostle. Yeah, and the Bible says nobody was lacking in them. How do we build trust back in the church so that people feel comfortable to either approach a brother or a sister or a member of the leadership or pastoral team? And also, how do we make ourselves accessible to members that they can freely walk to us and talk to us about their mental health?
Yeah. That's very crucial. I think it's to start with, trusting relationships don't happen overnight. We've got to allow time for relationships to grow. To build. And it takes being transparent as well.
Yes.
So there's a reciprocity in relationships.
Absolutely.
If we want people to be able to be transparent with us, we need to be transparent with them. Of course, the other thing that you and I know is almost the golden code of practice in our profession is confidentiality.
Yeah.
I think it's very, very important that people can feel confident that their very private matters remain private with us. And that they don't hear it on the headlines, or they don't hear it from a third party.
Or even the pulpit.
Or even from the pulpit. So
yes.
Those are things that are really very important, because we've got to consciously and intentionally create a safe place, a place where people can come to and they will feel that, okay, I can be, my worries and my concerns can be contained, and that I'm not going to hear this information. I'm going to have the sole ownership of managing this information. That is not going to go out to people that I don't want it to go out to. Because mental illness can be a very lonely place. Most people describe it as like going through a depression, particularly going through a dark tunnel. Yeah. So to add to the fact that they then have to manage information being out to people, being public knowledge, can be very difficult.
Can be, yeah. It could add to the distress and even the belief that things are not well with them. Absolutely. Sometimes you mentioned that mental illness is not a self-seeking behavior or self-inflicted condition. Yeah. It's not attention-seeking. But then what is the role of substances?
Okay. Yeah.
It's interesting I'm asking you this question,
because you are the substance specialist.
But I know that you mentioned briefly that how do we try and balance things, because whether it is the cause of it or what has precipitated it, or whether it is something to manage it, or how does this work in the
I think the reality is that the interplay between substance misuse and mental illness is a very complex one. As you know, one of the terms we use in the field is self-medication.
Yeah.
That sometimes, and this could also apply to young people, that sometimes people turn to alcohol or to street drugs, cannabis, or things that are stronger, cocaine or amphetamines, with a view to try and treat their mental illness.
Yeah.
So they want to feel better, and sometimes because alcohol takes them to a place that numbs their pain for a short period, they actually turn to those things. So there is that, and of course there is also the fact that sometimes if somebody becomes addicted on any substances, alcohol, cannabis, or any of those substances, that could actually lead to mental illness as well. Alcohol related to anxiety, related to depression, cannabis related to psychosis. However, let's come nearer home and talk about substances that sometimes people don't think can actually be toxic or can be harmful to their mental health. Let's talk about the Red Bull.
Okay.
With all the caffeine in it.
All right.
Let's talk about coffee and tea.
All right. Some of us might be guilty of that, yes.
That some of us trying to use to improve productivity.
Yeah.
We do know that those things can actually be detrimental to mental health as well. Excess of caffeine has been linked to anxiety disorders.
Yeah.
And the rule of thumb is that really for a normal cup of coffee, you shouldn't be having, for a normal cup of stimulant drink, and that includes caffeinated coffee, caffeinated tea and caffeinated coffee.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be having more than 3 cups. For a non-pregnant adult, 3 cups. For even a pregnant adult, it should be not more than 2 to 3 cups in a day. So
and they start trying to target the 400 per day.
400 milligrams of caffeine per day. So that's that. In addition to that is things like Red Bull. Some people think that is not. I checked the can of Red Bull. Was not necessarily. I mean, any substances, any stimulant drink,
yeah.
not necessarily any particular brand.
Yeah.
So, and I found out that some of them actually have up to 30% of the content is caffeine.
Yeah.
So that's also still, related to anxiety disorders, tachycardia, that's high pulse rate. So those things can be, and what happens is that you have an energy surge and then you have a drop.
And that drop is very difficult to manage. Because
so
it's almost,
going for more.
In my own field, we call that a crash.
Yeah.
And crash is not always something very, very enjoyable because it's going actually deeper than your normal state before you took the stimulant. And because one of the concerns also, talking about the young ones, it's the amount of stimulants that young people, I see them going to school in the morning at 8:30 and they've got a can of stimulant drink. That is a concern. And you also have this being sold in canteens, in schools, and you wonder why our children are very hyperactive or are misbehaving. And I hope this message is going out. That is not an healthy way of managing young people. The amount of caffeine they have in their system makes it even very difficult for them to concentrate in class.
Absolutely, yeah, true.
Yeah. So, okay, thank you. We touched on some of the normal daily things, and I found that one of the difficult substance for me to address generally in my field is alcohol, because it's socially acceptable. And I think coffee probably fits into that, and stimulant drink fits into that. Now from that, let's go on to what these things can cause. If you take loads of stimulant drinks or loads of coffee, it can affect your sleep.
Absolutely.
What's the role of sleep in mental health?
Good, yeah. Very important. I think one of the first things I want to say today is that it's the myth of the 21st century that cutting back on sleep can improve productivity. The reality is that research has shown over and over and over again that if you compromise on your sleep, you compromise on your productivity. And the question that people usually ask is, what's adequate sleep? How many hours of sleep should you be having? On the average, what research shows is that 7 to 8 hours of good quality sleep is what most adults need. Now, some people may need a little less than that or a little more than that, but the way to find out yourself is, what's your productivity like during the course of the day? And the question is, do you suffer from daytime tiredness for no apparent reason?
Yeah.
In the middle of the day, you just find that your energy levels have gone down. Do you struggle to keep awake for no apparent reason during the course of the day? I'm not talking about when you're in a boiling room and the heaters are on.
Meetings.
And then you're at a meeting where you are struggling to get your head around the agenda and you are thinking. But sometimes there's no reason for you to feel tired or for you to feel drowsy. And of course, if it's at a meeting, it's a one-off. But if it's something that's recurring, and then, of course, what then happens is there's also impairment of concentration and also irritability. People begin to get irritable for no apparent reason. So all of these are features that may suggest to you that you're not getting enough sleep during the course of the day. I know recently the NHS is, in fact, some NHS
Sleep
trusts
pods.
are now investing into sleep pods
Yes.
to allow doctors or healthcare professionals to have a power nap during the course of the day.
I'm looking forward to that.
I am looking forward to it too. So it's just really interesting that sleep is very crucial. But what one of the other things I wanted to share about sleep this evening actually is this: that not only does sleep deprivation compromise productivity, what we also now know about sleep deprivation is that sleep deprivation also compromises your judgment.
Yeah.
There was a piece of research out of America where they looked at two groups of people. There was a quarter of people that they were allowed to have normal sleep. I think they slept for about 8 hours of the night. And then there was another cohort of people who were only allowed, they were kept awake for as much as possible through the course of the night. They then exposed both of them to logical reasoning tests. No surprises there. The people who had compromised on their sleep fared more poorly in the test than the people who had slept well the night before. But that's not a big surprise. What was the big surprise was the perception of the two groups about their performance. Now, the cohort of people who had slept well actually underestimated their performance in the test. Guess what happened to the other group? The poor sleepers thought they had done well in a test where they had done poorly. Now, that's a concern because it suggests to you that your judgment, your judgment of your own performance also becomes compromised when you don't sleep well. So that could include risk-taking behavior, frequent proneness to accidents. Those are things that, so poor sleep is bad news, really.
Yeah. Which is why it's important for us to be able to manage our diaries.
Absolutely.
And you did mention you gave us some tips. And I don't know if you mind sharing some of those tips for us. You talked about the matrix. How can people manage their time better?
Okay. So there's a matrix that was actually, I think the first person that talked about it was a previous American president, Eisenhower. And what he said was that you should look at your tasks and divide them into important and unimportant tasks. And you should also divide them into a quadrant of important and unimportant tasks, and then urgent and non-urgent tasks. And that based on whether your tasks are important or unimportant, whether they're urgent or non-urgent, when you put them into the quadrants, the way to then decide on what to do with each of those quadrants is this. If your task is important and it's urgent, that means that it needs to be done right away.
Yeah.
If it's urgent and it's non-important, if it's important and it's not urgent, then you can defy it. So there's do it right away, there's defy it. If it's unimportant and it's not urgent, then you can either delegate it or delete it. And when I talk about that, sometimes, it puzzles me, and I think it's more among African people than our Caucasian colleagues.
Counterparts, yes.
Sometimes you go to a party and you are chatting with somebody, and they say, and you are just for chit chat, you say, who invited you to the party? And they say, it's my cousin's friend's friends. And I'm thinking in my head, oh my God, I wish my diary was that flexible. In which I could go to a friend's cousin's party.
Without being invited.
And sometimes I think those are very crucial issues about how we are managing our time. Overcommitment. Do you really need to go to that party where you are not invited and you just sit down there and you while away your whole Saturday evening when you could be doing something else more meaningful?
Yeah.
Because the reality is that if we are struggling to get the time to do the important things in our lives, it means that we are squandering that time doing something else that is not important.
Yeah. Even if it's resting.
Rest is a very crucial thing. I mean, if you're not having enough time for rest, for relaxation, and for family, it means you need to look at your diary again. There's something not quite right in that diary that is making you not have time for the essentials of life. Because sleep is not a luxury, relaxation is not a luxury, and family time is not a luxury.
Yeah.
We all know that all of those things are very significant, and they significantly contribute towards optimal mental health.
Hello.
Hello?
Hello. Good,
Hello, good afternoon.
good afternoon.
Yes, I have a question for the panel.
Please, who am I speaking to, please?
This is Lara Fakule calling in from the U.S.
Oh, hello. Thank
Am I
you.
behind?
Please, no, you're on time. Please go ahead. Thanks for calling in.
Okay, because I'm just listening with a great conversation going on. I want to put it to both of you that how do you help the Church of God, and how do you counsel people to know what time, particularly with mental health disorder, prayer works, prayer of deliverance works, but when should they seek help with professionals?
Thank you so much. Over to Dr. Ajayi.
Yeah, let me start by saying thank you for calling in all the way from South Carolina.
South Carolina, yes.
Yeah, it's
No,
very kind of...
Kentucky. I'm calling you from Kentucky.
Oh, Kentucky, rather. Right.
Kentucky, USA, here.
So I think in terms of when to seek for help, I think if mental illness begins, symptoms begin to interfere with functioning in their social life, in their family life, or with work, I think that will be a reason to seek professional help. And the reason, the way I see it is this: I don't think that, I think we should encourage people who come to church and people that we have responsibility over to see that both faith and medical interventions are not mutually exclusive. That each of them can work together. So it's not one or the other. And the other additional advice I usually give is there's no harm in speaking to a professional. You can speak to a professional, and if there's nothing else to be done, if there's no need for a professional intervention, sometimes people go to professionals and they are told, yeah, there's nothing wrong with you, you just need to change your lifestyle or adapt your lifestyle, and then things will be okay. So it's always better to err on the side of caution, in my view, to say speak to the general practitioner first, or the family physician in your case, in the United States, and then things can be moved on from there. So, but I always think that by default, it's still good to seek a professional opinion, and if that is not required at that point, the professional can always say you don't need that input.
And then also sometimes God has blessed us with professionals within the church, and with the consent of the person, we can involve a professional who is a member of the church. Yeah. If the person gives consent, and then from there we can signpost to the right place. Yeah. But I think the important thing that we're trying to raise now is that the church has to start managing emotional and psychological disorders differently. Yes. And nothing stops prayer, nothing stops anything that we do spiritually, and it does not make us less of a believer.
Absolutely,
yeah. Yes.
I find that sometimes people find it easier to take their antihypertensive, take their anti-malaria. When you start talking, particularly in the household of God, when you start talking about mental health disorder, they are very resistant to medications or even seeking professional help or counseling. Yes. But thank you very much. I just wanted to call in. Thank you very much for
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Fakule, for calling in. We appreciate your call.
Yes.
God bless.
Thank you. God bless. Thank you.
Bye. Yeah, that was a caller from Kentucky, wanting to find out how the church can approach issues of mental disorder. And I think it's an extremely important question, that we make use of the resources that God has placed at our disposal in the church. before we even start to venture out. And hopefully, with the awareness tonight, people will start to look at things differently. And I think it has to be a top-down thing.
Absolutely.
From the leadership down to the grassroots. And unfortunately, you have some people who have built their belief on the wrong doctrines. Like people drinking bleach and people eating dog and animal and all those things. I hope that people can actually go back to the scripture themselves and find out the truth and hold on to the truth and build on that truth. And I can't stress the issue of discipleship enough. And also mentorship that Dr. 𝐰𝐢𝐭𝐡 has been mentioning to us. Thank you for explaining that about managing time. I was wondering if I could take you to how do we manage our treasures that you mentioned in your articles.
Right, okay. So I think managing treasures is a very important thing. And one of the most prominent treasures that we have is actually our minds. And sometimes we take it for granted. I know out there, the media wants us to believe that our thoughts are, that we are irredeemable slaves to our thoughts. But that's not correct. We can actually be in control and in charge of our thoughts. So managing our thoughts, I think, is one of the most powerful tools of managing our mental health. And it starts with taking responsibility. In the third article that I wrote, I talked about the 3 levels of thinking. There's the superficial level of thinking, which is conscious thoughts. That's the most superficial level in which today I went into my wardrobe and decided that this is the way I was going to dress for this interview. That was something I consciously thought about. And now, under that level of thinking is what is called automatic thoughts. And it's like, the way to say it is like you are in a room and there's a radio playing in the background. You are not really, okay.
Hello? Hello? Yeah, please go on.
All right, okay. So I said that there is the superficial level of thought, and then there is the negative, there is the automatic thoughts, which is the next level of thoughts, deeper level of thought, in which it's like you're in a room, you are working in a room, and on the background there is a radio playing. You are not really concentrating. You are working in the room, you are working on your computer.
Yes.
You are not really concentrating on what's happening, but the radio is playing in the background anyway. Every day of our lives, there is it's like that. It's like on the background, there is a tape of thoughts playing. And those are automatic thoughts. They're always running. It's like running a commentary. Why did you? I should have said earlier when I came across that other driver or that brother. They're going to think that I'm ignoring them. Oh, I went past Sister Y and I didn't say hello to her. Why? Wonder what she thinks of me. And all of that is going on in the background. And sometimes it's so subtle and so unintentional that you're not even picking it up. That's the second level. Now, the third level of thought is called our core beliefs. Core beliefs are the essence of what we really, really believe. If people want to talk about it in colloquial terms, is what's your life philosophy? How you see yourself, how you see the world. And that's what drives everything. In that article as well, I wrote that I gave an illustration of a business executive who is on top of his game, middle-aged man, he's worked his fingers off to achieve so highly in life. And in the eyes of the world, he's an accomplished man. He's got all the things that come with being accomplished. He lives in a big house. He drives a top model car. He's happily married. He's got children in private education, and everything looks like it's going right. However, this man has always worked all his life trying to convince himself that he's good enough. And the reason why he's trying to convince himself that he's good enough is because in his core belief, the core belief about himself, the very thing that is driving him is that I'm not good enough. And where did he get that from? He got it from a critical parent or from a critical teacher. Somebody who was important and significant in his life when he was very young, who had spoken into his life and convinced him that he wasn't good enough at a time when he could receive that message. So the point I'm trying to make in terms of going through all those levels of thinking is that the core beliefs are really things that need to be addressed, because they are the ones that determine your automatic thoughts and the ones that determine even some of your conscious thoughts.
Thank you. Which takes me to two scriptures that was mentioned in one of your articles, and I think for me that those scriptures are extremely important to what we're trying to drive out tonight. And the first one is for Proverbs 4:23, and which says we need to guard our hearts. There is information overload.
I tell you.
And unless we consciously, physically, I don't even know what other word to use, guard our hearts. No, with there is the amount of information that we're going through our five senses. It's just unbelievable. And the second scripture is Romans 12:1-2, that says we need to renew our mind. For that young executive, the opportunity to renew his mind hasn't come. But for those of us who have Christ, we have the Holy Spirit that helps us. It's almost like it does the regular MOT. But the thing about it is that only if we allow it.
Absolutely.
Which is why we need to make that conscious effort to ensure that we manage those thoughts. In terms of that, you mentioned in the last one, which was mind your mind. How, in addition to all you've said, how do we mind our mind?
How do you mind your mind? Yes. So first thing, recognition.
Yes.
We talked about the 3 layers of thinking.
Yes.
You need to recognize the negative thoughts or the thought patterns that are not healthy. Secondly, you then need to record them. What is it that that young executive or the middle-aged executive needed to be supported to recognize that was what was driving him. The reason why he was working so hard was because he was trying to prove that I'm good enough. So he needed to recognize that he's driven by the fact that I am not good enough, so he needs to record that. Now, the third point is to now rationalize. Rationalization is about challenging some of the thoughts. I think the scripture that fits that best is that the Bible talks about the weapons of our warfare not being carnal, but pulling down strongholds, to the casting down of imaginations and every item that exalts itself against the knowledge of God. So some thoughts they are strongholds. Core beliefs are strongholds.
Yes.
That's what is always known all his life. That is not good enough. That needs to be pulled down. How do you rationalize it? It's about really bringing. It's like inviting that thought to a lawsuit. What's the evidence in support of your view?
You need to have a good solicitor.
You need to have a good solicitor. And the place to probably find those solicitors, because interestingly, even the American Psychiatry Association, for instance, talk about the fact that one of the very key things to building resilience is meditation. They talk about meditation. And so meditation on the scriptures is where, for instance, for some of the core beliefs that I have that have not been serving me well in my life, one of the ways I've been able to deal with them is to invite those thoughts to a lawsuit and look at how they match up with scriptures. So if the Bible says I'm the righteousness of God in Christ Jesus, how does that align with the fact that I'm no good? And the Bible talks about...
Hello, good evening. Welcome to Help Matters. Who am I speaking with, please?
If they told you that was what they were thinking. So put yourself in the position of a friend. Let's swap places for a moment. I told you that I'm no good. What are you going to tell that friend? You are going to help them to see the good things that you see in them and to be able to help them to challenge those thoughts. You know, the interesting thing about self-talk is this, because self-talk, all those negative automatic thoughts, core beliefs, some of them are really, they are expressed through self-talk.
So if you talk to yourself, you are not psychotic.
No.
Okay.
No. So, in fact, sometimes self-talk is actually not even expressly talked about. It's actually
Talking to your
the
mind,
commentary that's going on in the mind.
head, yes.
Now, so the question is helping ourselves to challenge those thoughts and to really put them in perspective. I mean, in my fourth article, which will be coming out in March, I'm going to actually look at thinking traps, which are the types of the categories in which we can put these negative thoughts and how to actually deal with each of them. But finally, just talking about how to deal with those thoughts, we recognize them, we record them, we rationalize them by asking all these questions that I've asked. When we actually rationalize them, we find out that indeed a lot of them are not based on evidence. They are not based on evidence. And finally, we replace them. If a thought is not serving you, it's not making you live your life optimally like you should, why hold on to it? And the interesting thing is that we know that people who have negative automatic thoughts, there's an association with depression, there's an association with underperformance in all spheres of life, particularly work and family, and there's also an association with being overcritical of themselves.
Wow. Welcome to Help Matters with Dr. Ajayi. Who am I speaking to, please? Hello, good evening.
Good evening. My name is Martins.
Martins.
Yes, Martins in Edinburgh.
Oh, Martins, how are you?
I'm fine, sir.
Thanks for calling in.
Thank you very much. I have a question.
Yes, please go ahead.
My question is how I'm aware that culture plays a role in determining mental health in a lot of young adults. And because of the minority where we come from, a lot of culture plays an active role in how we are being brought up and how our futures are being shaped.
Yes.
Now, where these cultural beliefs of having negative impact on young adults, what do you suggest or what do you advise parents to do moving forward in helping shape on the future of their children?
Thank you so much, Dr. Ajayi.
I think that's a very important question because you highlighted the role of parents in doing this. Because, yes, it's part of the parental responsibility too. And I think I'll just go over those steps again in terms of recognition. So it's the role of the parent to help the child to actually recognize the thought patterns that don't serve them well and that are negative. So that are contrary to a healthy future, that are contrary to healthy mental health, and that are also contrary to what the scripture says about them. So it's about helping people to, and like I said earlier in the interview, I said that sometimes I sit down with young people and we put pen to paper and we say, okay, this is what you are thinking about yourself. Tell me exactly what supports it. And then I try, I sort of tease out of them the things that are contrary to those thoughts. And if sometimes it gets to a point in which they are struggling, they are not able to identify the good things about themselves, maybe after 2 or 3 things, I then begin to highlight the good things about their life. The things that, and this is all written, is a paper exercise, because I know we live in a generation in which people go with the facts. So they can then go away with those facts written on paper to go and look at it. One of the other things that we can do, looking from the Christian perspective, is to actually help them to find how those things that they think about themselves that are contrary, actually, whether they align with scriptures or not. Because I've identified that the American Psychiatric Association talks about meditation as part of the things that they think can help to build resilience, and even spiritual exercises. That's a spiritual exercise to actually, so we now know that psychiatry is recognizing that there's a spiritual entity to man, there's a spiritual aspect of man, and that can actually be exploited to the person's benefit.
Okay, thank you very much.
I don't know whether that answers your question.
Yes, it does. In a way, it does answer the question, yes, but I'll leave it at that for now, sir.
Yeah, Martins, and I think also when you look at culture, I think one of the issues for us is that parents need to be available. All the things that Dr. Ajayi has mentioned can only happen if parents are available, if they know their children, and they know who they are already, and so when things change, they can identify.
Absolutely.
And we're talking about not only the fact that you can identify, even in dressing, Somebody who takes care of themselves and then suddenly just goes out of the house shabbily and you're wondering, that is unlike this boy. Those are the things, conduct, behavior, and other things that encompasses the child. And I think that is why availability, giving the children time to be able to express their difficulties and what they are going through, rather than getting negative counsel from outside. Thank you so much, Martins. God bless.
Thank you, sir. Thank you
for calling.
Yeah. I think that is one of the, actually, when you quoted that scripture, it was as if it was just aligning with the question we got from our last speaker. Martin was calling from Ireland. Thank you so much. Because when we look at culture, for some of us, it's very difficult to leave culture behind. And part of it is this manly belief that you are the hero, you are the captain, that even when you are sad or depressed, you can't talk about it. And it also comes to relationship, really, that if they're having issues, they don't want to go for counseling, they don't want to look for support. Can you help me talk to our viewers about the importance of actually living this macho belief and trying to come to terms with who they are and seeking help before it's too late? Because you mentioned earlier on in the program that prevention, they say, is better than cure. But also early intervention is better than late intervention. Dr. Ajayi, thank you.
So I think it's very important for our viewers out there, particularly men, to know that the research shows that black ethnic minority men do not seek medical help. There is research showing that we don't go to our GPs. I'm sure that the people listening to me are going to prove those figures wrong, but that's the reality, that we don't seek help and that we tend to also minimize symptoms. That's what the research shows. However, the way I see it is this. I know that a lot of middle-aged men or a lot of African men are driven by a sense of responsibility. We are very responsible people. We want to be there to provide. I know that one of the things we inherit in our African culture or cultural perception is that a man must provide for his household. Now, the way to look at that is in order to serve us well, to seek help for physical or for mental difficulties, is that when we are not well enough, we are not able to fulfill that role. So there's a conflict there. So seeking help might actually be, if seeking help means that the reason why you are seeking help is because you want to continue to be a good provider. You want to continue to be the man of the house that you want to be, then that might be a good reason to do that. The other thing is that we need to come off the view that seeking help is a sign of weakness. Like Dr. Ajayi said today, that we know that when there's an early intervention in mental disorders as well as physical disorders, we know that the outcome is a lot better. So that's the reason why it's really important to seek help early. And we know it over and over again. We've seen examples of people who are macho, and some of them actually public figures who were macho, but then we found out that the outcomes was not very favorable. So I think there's always somebody out there that somebody can confide in. It may be that sometimes, and I think that we need to be, the peer support is very important with African men. We need to be our brother's keeper and to carry that to the letter. So if there's a brother who is, for instance, struggling, I think our friends, brothers in church need to be saying, brother, I think you need to get that checked out. There's nothing spiritual about not going to your GP. There's nothing spiritual about not seeking help.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ajayi. Which, when you talked about it's the right support network.
Yeah.
Is it the right support peer group? Because if it's an harmful one also, we know that the outcome is not so wonderful. I remember in some of the episodes we had last year of the program, I was emphasizing to men a lot, especially African men. And we're seeing a lot of kidney problems in African men, back home in Africa and even here. They bring all this herbal stuff in that are soaked into locally made gin, which is methanol and not even alcohol.
So it's
and
very
it's
toxic.
very toxic to the kidneys. And they wonder why they are rushing to India for transplants and things like that. But that is a culture.
It is.
And sometimes it's very difficult for people to get out of their culture. Even though they've moved into a Western world, the culture has come with them across the border. Hello. Welcome to Health Matters with Dr. Ajayi. Who am I speaking to, please?
You're speaking to Sam from Sitting Bones.
Good evening, Uncle Sam. How are you, sir?
Good evening to you, sir. I'm watching the program with very great interest.
Thank you so much.
There's one question that I have. You know, you spoke about the last speaker, the other Dr. Ajayi spoke about African men not wanting to go to GPs for their problems. Now, one analogy that I wanted to bring across is this. You know, because the issue of gay people is so much out there, people are not afraid to talk about it anymore. Come out and say, I'm gay.
Uncle Sam, can we leave that issue because we're on here? Let's try and
down that road.
leave those comments.
You talk about,
Please,
when you talk about mental health issues,
Yeah.
people want to keep quiet about it. That's the problem. I think it needs to be desensitized one way or another so that more people can come out and talk about their issues.
Yes.
That's just my own thought.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think I agree with you in terms of the fact that it's very important to emphasize mental health literacy in church. And that's something from my experience as a psychiatrist, for instance. I think that's something that the awareness is beginning to, it's a mounting awareness now. People are beginning to get more aware, and a number of pastors are beginning to invite professionals to their pulpits to raise awareness. But that's very, very important, sir, that indeed it is very important for this mental health awareness to come into church and for people to feel able to talk about it, because stigma is festered on ignorance and also secrecy.
Yes. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Uncle Sam. God bless. Thank you so much.
Nice one. I've enjoyed the program. Well done, guys.
Thank you, sir.
All right, sir. Bye.
Right. Yes, that's an interesting one. You know, when we look at men, even when you call a program in church, even spiritual or church programs, you have more women than men. But let me just use this opportunity to speak to our listeners and our audience. Between the age of 40 and 75, you're going to get letters from your GP asking you to come for certain tests or certain investigations. Please ensure you go for those tests. Because like we've been saying all day, one of the things that the devil can use to attack any Christian is for you to lack the understanding or knowledge of the importance of certain things that are important for you. And it doesn't have any other way than deception. So he's telling you that you're a Christian, you don't need to go for your smear test. You're a Christian, you don't need to go for your mammogram. You're a Christian, you don't need to go for your prostate check. That is actually the deception of the devil. So when you get those letters, please act on them. That is just aside from what we're talking about tonight. Some people look for alternative ways that are in a way good for their physical health, mental health, emotional health. Please, can you tell us the role of exercise in maintaining a good mental health?
Yeah. So I think exercise is really, really very important. And the reason is because we do know that exercise has a lot of evidence to support physical and mental health. We know that when we exercise, we release chemicals which are called happy chemicals, endorphins, in our brain.
Yeah.
And that helps with lifting mood, and it also helps with a general sense of well-being. So that's so exercise is very important. Of course, the next question is how much exercise is sufficient exercise. Usually, the recommendation by the NHS is that you should exercise for at least half an hour, up to 3 times in a week. and it's such that it should raise your heart rate to about up to 120 beats per minute.
Okay.
So 30 minutes times 3 times in a week. And that could be, it doesn't have to be really very strenuous, because when people think about exercise, they think about going to the gym and lifting
Yes.
things, but it's really more than that. Exercise could be in form of walking, for instance, brisk walking. It could be in form of cycling. It could be just getting off at the bus stop, 2 bus stops or 2 stops earlier than you should, that you usually would. So there are several ways that we could swimming, for instance, swimming, playing badminton, playing tennis, things that will really get you physically active. So those are things too. And of course, also, one of the other things that people say that in church men don't, during praise and worship, that men don't get involved. And I've had a speaker actually say that when you do that in church, when you get into the worship, you jump, you shout, you scream, you dance, that it's a physical form of exercise.
Absolutely.
And so you are spoiled for choice. There's no reason not to exercise if one really gets something that one feels comfortable with.
Thank you, Dr. Ajayi. Tonight we've been talking about building resilience and trying to manage our mental and physical health, both spiritually and physically. And my guest has been Dr. Ajayi, a consultant psychiatry in general adult psych, and also the executive lead and founder at Mentor into Medicine Consultant. Time will not allow me to touch on that, but our guest tonight has been very instrumental in educating and bringing awareness to the Black ethnic minority about how they can get into medical school. And it's been very successful. And I'm hoping we can have Dr. Ajayi back in the studio one of these days to tell us more about that. But I will not allow Dr. Ajayi to go without him giving us a short insight into how the book Footprints of Giants has helped you to get to where you are today, and has also helped you shape your passion for what you do.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. Yes. So, like you said, it's actually 10 years last month that Footprints of Giants was published, and
10 years.
10 years, and so that's Footprints of Giants, which was published in January 2010, and basically this, I think, is about legacy living, really. In the book, I've basically, it's a collection of my thoughts about what it means to live a life, a great life. And greatness is not just about your bank account or about how many people follow you on Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn. It's really about how much impact you are making and how much you are living your purpose in life.
So I shouldn't get upset if I don't get 10,000 likes.
10,000 likes.
Okay.
And sometimes a lot of young people are swayed by that. When I put up a post, Facebook is doing all this. I mean, Facebook knows how they manage their page. It's not your page. They are the ones that are managing the page.
Absolutely.
So it doesn't mean that because you don't have likes that you are not liked.
Yes.
So Footprints of Giants really is about the fact that we are here on an assignment. God has called us here for a purpose, and there are certain habits that support fulfillment of that purpose. One of them is to recognize that we are here on an assignment. The other thing is to make a decision that we are going to fulfill that assignment. The other thing is to have a desire to fulfill that assignment. Without desire, nothing is accomplished.
Absolutely.
And of course, the other thing is about development. We've got to develop ourselves. We've got to keep working on it. That includes subscribing to mentoring, subscribing to coaching, reading, getting to know what we've been called to do. And of course, each of those is broken down into several bits. But finally, the other bit is about really dissemination of the greatness. There is no greatness without passing it forward.
Thank you.
So there's no success without a successor. And that's also something that we as Africans need to. Succession living or succession planning is something very crucial that we need to embrace as Africans.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Ajayi. And that's scriptural. 2 Timothy 2:2 tells us that what we've learned, what we've had, what we've seen, let us pass it on to able men who are able to run with it. Thank you for your time with us tonight. It's been an exciting one. We've not even been able to take a break because it's been quite engaging. But we appreciate your time, and I know you're a very, very busy man. And for our listeners, I hope you've been able to get something out of the program of tonight. Managing stress. One of the things that we didn't have time to go to was I was going to ask Dr. Ajayi about how to manage stress in the job environment. But quickly, my own summary about that is that is alluded to it in his summary that if you feel you are not capable of doing a job, tell your boss, ask for training, engage yourself in some form of training to get better at what you do. Don't sit down and be managing things that you can't manage without the knowledge and the capability. It will lead to stress. And I'm hoping, and I'm throwing that already to Dr. Ajayi, that we'll be able to have him back in the studio to tell us more about the mentorship and the mentoring that he's been involved in for how many years now?
So it's 2013, so that's about 6 years. Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah,
wow,
years.
awesome. And he's been very instrumental into the new medical school coming out in Canterbury, and his input has been very, very useful for the team. And so I would like to thank you for staying with us tonight. I hope you have had some enlightenment from the program of tonight. And as God helps us, we'll see you again very soon. This is Health Matters with Dr. Ajayi on 𝐻𝐥𝐴 TV. God bless you. Thank you, Dr. Ajayi.
Only God knows why it happened this way.